I woke up in my childhood bedroom, sunlight streaming through lace curtains I hadn't seen in 15 years. My hands trembled as I touched my face, smooth, unmarked by the scars that had defined my final moments. 22 again. The ornate mirror across the room reflected a version of myself I'd almost forgotten. Serafina Ashworth before the betrayal, before the execution, before everything fell apart. The ruby brooch lay on my vanity table exactly where I remembered it, its surface gleaming with an almost hypnotic allure. In my previous life, I'd refused this gift from Prince Adrian, sensing something wrong about its unnatural warmth. That refusal had been the beginning of my downfall, or so I'd thought. Now, with the knowledge of what was to come, I understood the truth. The brooch wasn't cursed, it was bugged. A listening device crafted by the kingdom's most skilled artificers, designed to monitor every word I spoke in private. In my first life, Adrian had framed me for treason when I wouldn't wear his token of love. He'd planted false evidence, bribed witnesses, and convinced my own family that I was a spy for the neighboring kingdom of Valeria. My execution had been swift and brutal, attended by jeering crowds who believed I'd betrayed everything they held sacred. But death had given me an unexpected gift: knowledge. And this time, I would use every piece of information I possessed to destroy the man who'd destroyed me. The soft knock on my door came right on schedule. Sarah? My younger sister, Leanna, peeked inside, her golden hair catching the morning light. In my previous life, she'd testified against me at the trial, claiming she'd overheard me speaking with Valerian agents. Her betrayal had cut deeper than any blade. "Come in," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. Leanna had been manipulated just as surely as everyone else, but her willingness to believe the worst of me still stung. "Father wants to see you in his study," she said, her blue eyes bright with excitement. "Prince Adrian sent word that he'll be arriving this afternoon with a special announcement." I nodded, playing the part of the eager fiancé. "I'll be down shortly." As Leanna left, I picked up the brooch, feeling its unnatural warmth seep through my fingers. The tiny listening device hidden within was a masterwork of magical engineering, nearly undetectable unless you knew exactly what to look for. Adrian had been so proud of his cleverness, using it to gather intelligence on noble families throughout the kingdom. The evidence of his spying network was hidden in his private study at the palace, information I'd learned too late in my previous life. This time, I would turn his own weapon against him. I pinned the brooch to my blue silk dress and made my way downstairs to Father's study. Lord Marcus Ashworth looked exactly as I remembered: tall, distinguished, with graying temples and the bearing of a man accustomed to command. He'd loved me once, before Adrian's poison turned him against his own daughter. "Ah, Serafina," he smiled as I entered, gesturing to the chair across from his mahogany desk. "I trust you slept well. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for our family." "Indeed, Father." I settled into the chair, my posture perfect, my expression serene. "I'm curious about Prince Adrian's announcement." "As am I." Father's eyes gleamed with ambition. "Your marriage to the prince will elevate House Ashworth beyond our wildest dreams. The alliance between our lands and his claim to the throne." He trailed off, lost in visions of political power. I bit back bitter laughter. In my previous life, Father had cared more about political advancement than his daughter's happiness or safety. That single-minded ambition had made him an easy target for Adrian's manipulation. When the prince had needed a scapegoat for his treasonous activities, Father had abandoned me without hesitation to protect the family's reputation. "I hope I can serve House Ashworth well," I said, touching the brooch meaningfully. Every word was being recorded now, transmitted through magical frequencies to Adrian's network of listeners. "My loyalty to the kingdom is absolute." Father beamed with pride. "I've never doubted that, my dear. Now I have some correspondence to attend to before the prince arrives. Why don't you spend some time in the gardens? I know how you enjoy the roses." I excused myself and walked slowly through the manor's corridors, taking note of every detail. The Ashworth estate was beautiful but modest compared to the grandeur of the royal palace. Father's ambitions far exceeded our actual wealth and influence, a weakness Adrian had exploited masterfully. In the rose garden, I allowed myself a moment of genuine emotion. The white roses were in full bloom, their perfume heavy in the summer air. I'd loved this place as a child, spending hours reading beneath the old oak tree. In my previous life, they'd burned these gardens after my execution, claiming they were tainted by a traitor's presence. My lady? A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. Thomas, our head gardener, approached with his customary gentle smile. He was one of the few servants who'd remained loyal to me even after the accusations began. For his faithfulness, Adrian had him imprisoned on charges of aiding a traitor. Hello, Thomas. I touched one of the white roses, its petals soft beneath my fingers. The gardens are magnificent this year. Thank you, my lady. Though I fear the eastern border flowers have been struggling. Perhaps it's the influence of our neighbors. His weathered face creased with concern. I understood his meaning immediately. In my previous life, Thomas had tried to warn me about strange men lurking near the estate's borders, Valerian scouts gathering intelligence. His observations had been crucial evidence of the real conspiracy, but by then it was too late to save me. Perhaps we should pay closer attention to those areas, I suggested carefully, knowing Adrian's device was recording every word. I'd hate for any unwelcome influences to take root. Thomas nodded knowingly. I'll keep watch, my lady. Trust me to tend to any problems that arise. After he left, I spent another hour in the gardens, speaking aloud about trivial matters while my mind raced with plans. I needed to appear completely normal while positioning myself perfectly for what was to come. Adrian's arrival would set everything in motion. The sound of approaching horses announced the prince's arrival in the late afternoon. I positioned myself in the main hall, smoothing my skirts and checking that the brooch was prominently displayed. The great doors opened to admit Prince Adrian Blackwood in all his terrible glory. He was as handsome as I remembered, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair and penetrating green eyes. His smile was charming and practiced, designed to disarm and deceive. In my previous life, I'd been genuinely attracted to him initially, believing his courtship was motivated by affection rather than political calculation. Lady Seraphina. He swept into an elegant bow, his eyes immediately finding the brooch on my dress. Satisfaction flickered across his features so briefly that anyone else would have missed it. You look radiant. Your Highness. I curtsied deeply, allowing my voice to carry a breathless quality. Welcome to Ashworth Manor. Father appeared at my side, practically vibrating with nervous energy. Your Highness, we are honored by your presence. Shall we retire to the study for some refreshment? Actually, Adrian said, his gaze never leaving my face. I was hoping Lady Seraphina might show me the famous Ashworth Gardens first. I've heard they're particularly beautiful this time of year. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression pleasantly surprised. Of course, Your Highness, I'd be delighted. We walked through the gardens as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Adrian played the part of the attentive suitor perfectly, asking about the different flowers and commenting on their beauty. All the while, I knew he was testing the brooch's range and clarity. This brooch is exquisite, he said eventually, reaching out to touch it with feigned admiration. It suits you perfectly. Thank you, I breathed, allowing my cheeks to flush as if his attention affected me deeply. I treasure any gift from you, Your Highness. His smile sharpened almost imperceptibly. I'm pleased you find it worthy. I had it specially crafted by the kingdom's finest artisans. Wear it always, my dear. Think of it as a symbol of the bond between us. Always, I promised, my voice soft with apparent devotion. We continued our walk, and I began implementing the first stage of my plan. Speaking quietly as if sharing intimate secrets, I began to plant carefully crafted lies designed to serve my purposes. I must confess something, I whispered, glancing around nervously. I've been having the strangest dreams lately, visions of the future, as if some divine power is showing me glimpses of what's to come. Adrian's interest sharpened immediately. In my previous life, I'd learned that he was obsessed with prophecy and omens, constantly seeking any advantage that might guarantee his ascension to the throne. What sort of visions? He asked, his voice carefully casual. I paused beside a fountain, trailing my fingers in the water as if gathering courage. I see great changes coming to the kingdom. threats from within and without, but also opportunities for those wise enough to seize them. Tell me more. I shook my head, feigning reluctance. Perhaps I've said too much. Such things seem foolish in daylight. Nothing you say could ever seem foolish to me, Adrian assured me, his voice warm with false sincerity. I value your insights above all others. That night, I lay in bed listening to the manners settle around me, knowing that somewhere, Adrian's agents were analyzing every word I'd spoken. Phase 1 was complete. I'd established myself as a potential source of prophetic intelligence while appearing to wear his monitoring device willingly. The next few weeks passed in a carefully orchestrated dance. I met with Adrian regularly, always wearing the brooch, always sharing new visions that served my ultimate purpose. I spoke of seeing foreign agents in the capital, of a great conspiracy that threatened the realm, of the need for a strong leader to unite the kingdom against its enemies. Meanwhile, I used my knowledge of the future to begin building my own network. I reached out to people I'd known in my previous life, nobles who had been unjustly accused or executed, commoners who had suffered under Adrian's eventual tyranny, anyone who had reason to oppose him once they learned the truth. My first major ally was Sir Marcus Thorne, a knight whose family had been destroyed by false accusations of treason, accusations I now knew had originated from Adrian's spy network. I approached him carefully, using my foreknowledge to convince him that I possessed information about the real conspirators. Lady Seraphina, he said when I requested a private meeting in his modest apartments in the capital. I confess I'm surprised by your message. What business could the prince's betrothed have with a disgraced knight? Sir Marcus was a broken man, his once proud bearing diminished by years of exile and disgrace. His family had been accused of selling military secrets to Valeria, their lands confiscated, their name dragged through the mud. In my previous life, I'd later learned that Adrian himself had fabricated the evidence against them to remove a political rival. I believe justice has not been served in your case, I said simply, and I have reason to believe that the real traitors still move freely among us. His eyes sharpened. That's a dangerous accusation, my lady. Truth often is. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. Tell me, Sir Marcus, did you ever discover how your private correspondence found its way into enemy hands? Correspondence that should have been impossible for any foreign agent to intercept? The color drained from his face. How could you know about that? Because I've been watching, listening, learning. I touched the brooch meaningfully. There are more ways to spy on loyal subjects than you might imagine. Over the following hour, I carefully revealed selected pieces of information about Adrian's intelligence network, always stopping short of providing proof, but giving Sir Marcus enough details to begin his own investigation. By the time I left, I could see the fire of purpose rekindling in his eyes. My second ally was Lady Catherine Westbrook, a brilliant woman whose brother had been executed for supposedly passing military plans to Valerian forces. I found her running a small school for orphan children in the capital's poorest district, her noble title stripped away but her dignity intact. Lady Westbrook, I said, finding her in the courtyard teaching a group of children their letters. Might I have a word? She looked up, recognizing me immediately. Lady Seraphina, this is unexpected. After dismissing the children for their midday meal, she led me into a small office filled with books and papers. What brings the future princess to my humble school? Your brother was innocent, I said without preamble. The evidence against him was fabricated. Her composure cracked slightly. Thomas has been dead for 3 years. What purpose could such a statement serve now? Justice delayed is not justice denied, I replied. The man responsible for your brother's death still walks free, still plots against the kingdom, but his time is running out. I spent the next hour sharing carefully selected information about Adrian's network, focusing on details that would be impossible for me to know, unless I had access to classified intelligence. Lady Catherine was sharp enough to realize the implications immediately. You're suggesting Prince Adrian himself is involved in this conspiracy? She asked finally. I'm suggesting that the trail of evidence, when properly followed, leads to surprising places. I stood to leave. Your brother died protecting secrets he never actually possessed. The real secrets are still out there, waiting to be exposed. As summer progressed, I continued building my network while maintaining my facade with Adrian. The prince grew increasingly dependent on the intelligence I provided through the bugged brooch, not realizing that every piece of information was carefully crafted to serve my purposes. I told him about visions of Valerian agents planning to infiltrate the Harvest Festival, leading him to waste resources on non-existent threats. I described prophetic dreams of political unrest in the northern provinces, causing him to redeploy loyal troops away from the capital. Most importantly, I spoke repeatedly of seeing great danger to the kingdom's true leaders, while describing mysterious traitors who hid in plain sight. These visions grow stronger each day, I confided during one of our private walks. I see shadows moving through the palace itself, people who appear loyal but harbor darkness in their hearts. Adrian's paranoia, already substantial, began to consume him. He started seeing enemies everywhere, questioning the loyalty of his own supporters. This worked perfectly for my purposes, as his erratic behavior began to alienate potential allies. Meanwhile, my network of allies grew stronger. Sir Marcus had begun his own investigation into the spy network, using his military connections to trace the sources of forged intelligence. Lady Catherine was using her extensive contacts among the common people to gather information about suspicious activities around the capital. Most importantly, I had managed to make contact with Captain Elena Brightwater of the Royal Guard. In my previous life, she had been one of the few people to question the evidence against me, but her concerns had been dismissed by her superiors. This time, I approached her before the accusations began. "Captain Brightwater," I said, finding her during her evening rounds of the palace. "Might I speak with you privately?" She was a stern woman in her 40s with graying hair and intelligent brown eyes. Her reputation for integrity was unquestioned, which made her dangerous to Adrian's plans. "Lady Seraphina, is everything all right?" "I hope so," I said carefully, "but I've become concerned about certain irregularities I've observed. As someone marrying into the royal family, I feel a responsibility to ensure the crown's security." I led her through a careful conversation about palace security, eventually touching on the possibility of intelligence leaks and internal threats. Captain Brightwater was too experienced to miss the implications of my carefully chosen words. "These are serious concerns," she said finally. "Do you have specific evidence of security breaches?" "Not yet," I admitted, "but I fear evidence may soon become available. When it does, I hope the Guard will be prepared to act swiftly and decisively." By early autumn, all the pieces were in place. Adrian's paranoia had reached dangerous levels, causing him to make increasingly erratic decisions. My network of allies was ready to move when the moment came. Most importantly, I had convinced Adrian that I possessed prophetic abilities that made me invaluable to his future reign. "My dear Seraphina," he said during one of our evening meetings, "your visions have proven remarkably accurate. I believe the gods themselves have blessed our union." "I pray that my gifts may serve the kingdom well," I replied, touching the brooch. "Though I confess some of my recent visions have been troubling." His eyes sharpened immediately. "Troubling how?" I allowed my voice to shake slightly. "I see great betrayal coming from within the royal circle itself. Someone very close to the crown is planning something terrible. The visions are unclear, but I sense it will happen soon." "Who?" Adrian demanded. "What do you see?" "The face is always shadowed," I said, pressing my hand to my forehead as if struggling with inner sight. "But I see documents being passed to enemy agents. I see gold changing hands. I see—" Oh, this is too terrible to speak aloud. "Tell me," he commanded. "I see someone using their position of trust to destroy the kingdom from within. Someone who appears completely loyal but secretly serves foreign masters." I met his eyes with apparent anguish. "Your Highness, I fear this betrayer may be someone we both trust implicitly." That night, Adrian's paranoia reached a fever pitch. He began conducting secret investigations into his own supporters, looking for the betrayer from my visions. This created exactly the chaos I needed to implement the final phase of my plan. I had one last crucial ally to recruit, Jonathan Gray, the king's personal secretary and record keeper. In my previous life, he had been horrified when he eventually discovered the extent of Adrian's spy network, but by then it was too late to prevent my execution. This time, I approached him while he still had the power to act. Master Gray, I said, finding him working late in the Royal Archives. I hope I'm not disturbing you. He looked up from his desk, surprised to find me in the restricted areas of the palace. Lady Seraphina, I wasn't expecting... Is there something I can help you with? Jonathan was a thin, scholarly man with a reputation for meticulous record-keeping and absolute discretion. Adrian had made the mistake of trusting him completely, never realizing that the secretary's loyalty was to the crown rather than to any individual. I've discovered something troubling, I said, closing the door behind me. Records that suggest someone has been falsifying intelligence reports and manipulating royal correspondence. His face grew grave. That's an extremely serious accusation. I know, but I have reason to believe that some of the recent treason trials may have been based on fabricated evidence. I spent the next hour carefully revealing information about Adrian's intelligence network, focusing on details that Jonathan could verify through his own records. I was particularly careful to emphasize how the spy network had been used to eliminate political rivals through false accusations. If what you're suggesting is true, Jonathan said finally, then innocent people have died based on lies. I believe so, and I fear more innocents may suffer unless someone with access to the truth steps forward. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on his desk. What do you need from me? Access to the restricted files, particularly any records related to intelligence gathering and the recent treason trials. If I'm right, the pattern will be clear once all the evidence is assembled. He nodded slowly. I can arrange that. But Lady Seraphina, if you're wrong about this, or if you're discovered, then I'll face the consequences, I said firmly. But I cannot stand by while justice is perverted and innocent blood is shed. That night, I began the most dangerous phase of my plan. Using Jonathan's access to the restricted archives, I compiled comprehensive evidence of Adrian's spy network and his systematic elimination of political rivals. The proof was overwhelming once assembled. Forged documents, bribed witnesses, manufactured evidence, and a pattern of accusations that always benefited Adrian's political ambitions. But I needed more than just documentary evidence. I needed Adrian to incriminate himself directly, and I had the perfect tool to accomplish that. The bugged brooch he had given me. The next evening, I requested a private meeting with Adrian in his study at the palace. I wore the brooch prominently, knowing that our conversation would be recorded by his own surveillance network. Your Highness, I said, allowing distress to color my voice, my visions have become clear. I must speak with you urgently about the betrayer in our midst. Adrian's study was a lavish room filled with expensive furniture and artwork, but I noticed details that had escaped me in my previous life. A hidden panel behind one of the bookcases, a locked chest that probably contained additional surveillance devices, subtle wear patterns on the floor that suggested secret meetings. Tell me everything, Adrian commanded, leaning forward eagerly. I've seen the face at last, I whispered, glancing around nervously as if afraid of being overheard. The betrayer, it's someone I never would have suspected. Who? I paused, as if gathering courage. Captain Brightwater, I have seen her passing information to Valerian agents. She's been using her position in the Royal Guard to gather intelligence and feed it to our enemies. Adrian's eyes lit up with satisfaction. In my previous life, he had always viewed Captain Brightwater as a threat due to her integrity and independence. Now, I was handing him the perfect excuse to eliminate her. Are you certain? He asked. The visions are unmistakable, but Your Highness, I fear she's not working alone. I've seen other faces in the shadows. Nobles who appear loyal but secretly serve foreign masters. Tell me their names. I provided a list that included several of Adrian's actual co-conspirators. People I knew from my previous life were guilty of the crimes I was now attributing to them. But I presented them as if they were loyal subjects being manipulated by the real traitors. This conspiracy runs deeper than I imagined, Adrian said, his mind already racing with possibilities. If Captain Brightwater has been compromised, we must act quickly. But how can we move against her without proof? I asked innocently. Accusations alone won't be enough, especially against someone of her reputation. Adrian smiled coldly. Leave that to me. I have methods of gathering evidence that even the cleverest traitor cannot evade. Methods? I asked, playing confused. Intelligence gathering techniques, he said vaguely. Ways of monitoring suspected traitors to document their crimes. I leaned forward conspiratorially. You mean like listening devices? Hidden surveillance? Something like that. His smile grew wider. In fact, the device you're wearing right now is one of my finest surveillance tools. Every conversation you've had while wearing it has been recorded and analyzed by my agents. My eyes widened in apparent shock. This brooch? But that means you've been listening to everything I've said for weeks. Every word, Adrian confirmed proudly. It's been invaluable for confirming your prophetic abilities and gathering intelligence on potential threats. I stood up abruptly, my hand flying to the brooch with apparent horror. You've been spying on me? Your own fiancé? For the good of the kingdom, Adrian said smoothly. Your visions are too valuable to risk losing to enemy interference. But what about trust? What about love? I let tears gather in my eyes. How can you claim to care for me while treating me like a subject under surveillance? Adrian's expression hardened. Naive girl, love is a luxury we cannot afford when the kingdom's security is at stake. Your value lies in your prophetic abilities, not in your feelings. I stared at him in apparent shock, letting the mask of devoted fiancé slip away. Then you never cared for me at all. This engagement, the courtship, everything. It was all calculated manipulation. Of course it was, Adrian said impatiently. Did you really think a prince would marry for affection? Your visions make you useful. Your family's loyalty makes you safe. That's all that matters. I sank back into my chair, the picture of devastated innocence. And what about Captain Brightwater? What will you do to her? She'll be arrested, tried for treason, and executed, Adrian said matter-of-factly. Along with anyone else your visions identify as traitors. Even if the evidence is fabricated? Adrian's smile turned cruel. Evidence can be quite convincing when properly presented. I've had considerable practice in making guilty verdicts inevitable. I looked up at him with apparent realization dawning. You've done this before. Other treason trials, other executions. You've been manufacturing evidence all along. When necessary, he confirmed, the kingdom requires strong leadership, and strong leaders eliminate threats efficiently. How many innocent people have died because of your lies? I whispered. Innocence is subjective, Adrian replied coldly. Anyone who threatens my ability to rule effectively is, by definition, a threat to the kingdom. I stood up slowly, my hand moving to unclasp the brooch. I won't be part of this anymore. I won't help you destroy innocent lives. You don't have a choice, Adrian said, his voice turning dangerous. You'll continue wearing that device, and you'll continue providing me with intelligence from your visions. If you refuse, I'll simply have you declared mentally unstable and confined for your own protection. And if I try to expose your conspiracy, who would believe the mad ravings of an unstable woman over the word of a prince? Adrian stood up, moving to tower over me intimidatingly. Besides, you're already implicated. Your cooperation with my surveillance makes you an accessory to everything I've done. I clutched the brooch tightly, my voice breaking. So I'm trapped. Either help you destroy others or be destroyed myself. Now you understand. Adrian's satisfaction was evident. I'm glad we could have this honest conversation. It will make our future cooperation much more efficient. I nodded slowly as if accepting defeat. I understand completely. What Adrian didn't realize was that I was still wearing the brooch during our entire conversation. Every word he'd spoken, every admission of guilt, every detail of his conspiracy, every threat he'd made was being recorded by his own surveillance network. I left his study that night with everything I needed to destroy him. The next morning, I met with Jonathan Gray in the archives, bringing with me both the documentary evidence we'd compiled and a written transcript of Adrian's confessions from the previous evening. My God, Jonathan breathed as he read through the prince's recorded admissions. He actually confessed to fabricating evidence and murdering innocent people. He's so confident in his power that he sees no need to hide his crimes, I said. but confidence can become carelessness. What do you need me to do? Prepare formal charges of treason against Prince Adrian. Document everything, the surveillance network, the false accusations, the manufactured evidence. Make multiple copies and ensure they reach people Adrian can't eliminate or silence. Jonathan nodded grimly. I'll need a few days to prepare everything properly. You have them, but move quickly. Adrian is planning to arrest Captain Brightwater soon, and once he does, he'll move against anyone else he perceives as a threat. While Jonathan prepared the official charges, I moved to alert my other allies. I sent coded messages to Sir Marcus, Lady Catherine, and Captain Brightwater, warning them that Adrian was preparing to move against his perceived enemies. Sir Marcus was the first to respond, arriving at the Ashworth estate that afternoon with several loyal knights. Lady Seraphina, he said grimly, your message was quite clear. How much time do we have? Not long. Adrian is paranoid and increasingly reckless. He'll make his move within days. Then we must be ready. Sir Marcus's eyes burned with the fire of long-delayed justice. What do you need us to do? I outlined my plan carefully. When Adrian moved to arrest Captain Brightwater and the others, we would be ready with our counterattack. The timing had to be perfect. We needed Adrian to commit himself to his false accusations before revealing that we possessed proof of his guilt. Lady Catherine arrived that evening with several influential nobles who had grown suspicious of Adrian's methods. Captain Brightwater came in secret, using her knowledge of palace security to avoid detection. This is incredibly dangerous, the captain warned. If Adrian discovers what we're planning, he'll have us all executed as conspirators. He'll try to have us executed anyway, I replied. At least this way, we have a chance to take him down with us. We spent the next 2 days in careful preparation. Jonathan completed the formal charges and distributed copies to trusted allies throughout the kingdom. Sir Marcus positioned his loyal knights at strategic points around the capital. Lady Catherine used her network of common people to spread word of Adrian's crimes, ensuring that public opinion would turn against him when the truth was revealed. Most importantly, I continued my charade with Adrian, feeding him false information designed to make him overconfident and careless. My visions grow stronger each day, I told him during our final private meeting. I can see the conspiracy clearly now. Captain Brightwater will attempt to flee the kingdom tomorrow night, taking stolen intelligence with her. Adrian's eyes gleamed with anticipation. Perfect! We'll arrest her before she can escape. But Your Highness, what if she tries to claim innocence? What if she demands a public trial? Let her, Adrian said confidently. I have more than enough evidence to ensure her conviction. Fabricated evidence? I asked quietly. Adrian's smile turned predatory, the most convincing kind. That night, I removed the brooch for the final time, knowing that I had everything I needed to destroy the man who had destroyed me in my previous life. The next evening, as planned, Adrian moved to arrest Captain Brightwater. She was conducting her normal rounds of the palace when a squad of guards surrounded her. Captain Elena Brightwater, announced Adrian's lieutenant, you are under arrest for treason against the crown. On what charges? Brightwater demanded, her hand moving instinctively to her sword. Conspiracy with foreign agents, theft of classified intelligence, and betrayal of the royal trust, the lieutenant replied, producing a scroll with the formal accusations. Word of the arrest spread quickly through the palace and into the capital beyond. By morning, the entire kingdom was buzzing with news that the respected captain of the royal guard had been accused of treason. But Adrian had made a crucial mistake in his confidence. He had moved too quickly, without properly preparing public opinion or ensuring that all potential witnesses were silenced. More importantly, he had no idea that his enemies were ready for him. The trial was scheduled for 3 days later to be held in the Great Hall of Justice before a panel of senior nobles and judges. Adrian was confident that his fabricated evidence and bribed witnesses would ensure a swift conviction. He had no idea what was waiting for him. On the morning of the trial, the Great Hall was packed with nobles, commoners, and foreign dignitaries who had come to witness the proceedings. Adrian sat in the royal box, resplendent in his ceremonial robes, radiating confidence and authority. Captain Brightwater stood in the dock with dignity and tact, her uniform stripped of rank insignia, but her bearing still proud. When the charges were read, she entered a plea of not guilty and demanded the right to present evidence in her defense. The Crown will present its evidence first, announced the Chief Judge. Prince Adrian, you may begin. Adrian rose gracefully, every inch the righteous ruler protecting his kingdom from treachery. My lords and ladies, we are gathered today to witness justice being served upon one who betrayed the sacred trust placed in her. He began presenting his evidence, documents purporting to show correspondence between Brightwater and Valerian agents, witness testimony claiming to have seen her meeting with foreign spies, financial records suggesting she had been paid for her treachery. It was a masterful performance, carefully crafted to appear overwhelming and conclusive. In my previous life, similar fabricated evidence had been used to convict me, and I had watched helplessly as lie after lie was presented as fact. But this time was different. When Adrian finished his presentation, Captain Brightwater's appointed defender rose to speak. My lords, the defense calls its first witness, Master Jonathan Gray, Keeper of Royal Records. Adrian's confidence flickered for just a moment as Jonathan approached the witness stand. He had assumed that the royal secretary would either remain neutral or support the Crown's case. Master Gray, the defender said, in your capacity as keeper of official records, have you had occasion to examine the documents presented by the Crown? I have, Jonathan replied clearly. And what is your professional assessment of their authenticity? Jonathan looked directly at Adrian as he answered. The documents are forgeries. Skilled forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. A murmur ran through the hall. Adrian half rose from his seat, his face darkening with anger. Furthermore, Jonathan continued, I have conducted a comprehensive review of similar documents used in previous treason trials. The pattern of forgery is consistent and extensive. Objection! Adrian called out. This witness is exceeding the scope of— Your Highness, the Chief Judge said firmly. Master Gray is a sworn officer of the Crown. His testimony regarding official documents is admissible. Jonathan then produced a detailed analysis of the forged documents, explaining exactly how they had been fabricated and pointing out specific inconsistencies that proved their falseness. The evidence was technical but devastating. The defense calls its next witness, the defender announced, Sir Marcus Thorne. Sir Marcus approached the stand with grim determination. He had spent weeks investigating Adrian's spy network, and his testimony detailed the systematic use of fabricated evidence to eliminate political rivals. I have traced the sources of intelligence used in 17 different treason trials over the past 5 years, Sir Marcus testified. In every case, the evidence originates from the same network of paid informants and forged documents. And who controls this network? The defender asked. Sir Marcus looked directly at Adrian. Prince Adrian Blackwood. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Adrian stood up, his face contorted with rage. This is preposterous. These witnesses are clearly part of the conspiracy they claim to expose. Your Highness, the Chief Judge said, you will have an opportunity to respond. Please allow the defense to present its case. The third witness was Lady Catherine Westbrook, who testified about the devastating impact of false accusations on innocent families. Her testimony was emotional and powerful, describing how the systematic use of fabricated evidence had destroyed countless lives. But the final witness was the most damaging of all. The defense calls Lady Seraphina Ashworth. I rose from my seat in the gallery and walked to the witness stand, feeling Adrian's eyes burning into me with confused fury. He had no idea what I was about to reveal. Lady Seraphina, the defender said, you are engaged to Prince Adrian. Why would you testify in defense of Captain Brightwater? I looked directly at Adrian, seeing the confusion and growing alarm in his eyes. Because I have knowledge of Prince Adrian's true activities that I can no longer keep silent. What knowledge? I reached into my dress and withdrew the ruby brooch, holding it up for all to see. This brooch was given to me by Prince Adrian as a token of his affection. What he didn't tell me was that it contains a listening device designed to monitor my private conversations. Gasps echoed through the hall. Adrian's face went white. For weeks, I wore this device unknowingly, believing it was simply a gift. But I eventually discovered its true purpose. I paused, letting the implications sink in. However, Prince Adrian made a crucial error. In his arrogance, he continued recording even after revealing the truth to me. What did you learn from these recordings? The defender asked. I learned that Prince Adrian has been systematically fabricating evidence to eliminate anyone he perceives as a threat. I learned that he has murdered innocent people through false accusations. And I learned that he views loyalty, justice, and even love as tools to be manipulated for his own advancement. I then produced a transcript of my final conversation with Adrian, reading his words aloud to the stunned assembly. Every admission of guilt, every callous dismissal of innocent life, every threat he had made, all of it was laid bare before the court. Evidence can be quite convincing when properly presented. I read from the transcript. I've had considerable practice in making guilty verdicts inevitable. The hall was silent except for my voice as I continued reading Adrian's confessions. When I reached his admission about fabricating evidence and his dismissal of the innocent lives lost, several nobles in the gallery stood up in outrage. And finally, I said, my voice growing stronger, when I expressed horror at his methods, Prince Adrian made his position perfectly clear. Innocence is subjective. Anyone who threatens my ability to rule effectively is, by definition, a threat to the kingdom. I set down the transcript and looked directly at Adrian, who was now visibly shaking with rage and fear. These are not the words of a man protecting the kingdom. These are the words of a tyrant who values power above justice, convenience above truth, and control above the lives of his own subjects. The chief judge called for order as the hall erupted in shocked conversation. Adrian stood up, his composure completely shattered. "This is a conspiracy," he shouted. "These witnesses are all traitors working together to undermine the crown. Lady Seraphina has clearly been corrupted by enemy agents." "Your Highness," I said calmly, "the recordings speak for themselves. Your own words, captured by your own surveillance device, prove your guilt beyond any doubt." "Lies! All lies!" Adrian's voice cracked with desperation. "I demand that these false accusations be dismissed immediately." The chief judge rose, his expression grave. "Prince Adrian, in light of the evidence presented, this court must consider formal charges against you as well as the original defendant." "You have no authority to charge a prince of the realm," Adrian snarled. "Actually," came a new voice from the back of the hall, "we do." Everyone turned to see King Edward himself entering the Great Hall, flanked by the royal guard. The king's face was ashen, and his bearing showed the weight of terrible knowledge. "Father!" Adrian exclaimed, relief flooding his features. "Thank God you're here. These traitors are attempting to overthrow the crown with fabricated evidence and false testimony." King Edward walked slowly to the front of the hall, his eyes never leaving his son's face. "I have already reviewed the evidence, Adrian. All of it." The king's voice was heavy with grief and disgust. "Master Gray brought me copies of the documents, the testimony, and the recordings last night. I spent the entire night verifying their authenticity with my most trusted advisors." Adrian's relief transformed into dawning horror. "Father, surely you don't believe these lies?" "I believe the evidence of your own words," the king said quietly. "I believe the pattern of fabricated documents that bears your personal seal. I believe the testimony of honorable people whose integrity has never been questioned." The king turned to address the assembly. "Citizens of the realm, I stand before you today with a heavy heart. The evidence presented here reveals crimes so heinous, so contrary to everything our kingdom stands for, that I can barely comprehend them." He paused, gathering strength. "Prince Adrian Blackwood, by the authority vested in me as your king and your father, I hereby strip you of all royal titles and privileges. You are no longer a prince of this realm." "Father, no!" Adrian lunged forward, but the royal guard stepped in to restrain him. "I did everything for the kingdom. Everything I did was to protect the crown." "You murdered innocent people," the king said, his voice breaking slightly. "You perverted justice itself. You turned the very institutions meant to protect our subjects into weapons of oppression." The king then turned to Captain Brightwater, who had watched the proceedings with stunned amazement. "Captain Brightwater, I offer you my deepest apologies for the injustice you have suffered. Your honor and your service to the crown are beyond reproach." "Your Majesty," Brightwater said, bowing deeply, "I serve at your pleasure and the kingdom's need." The king nodded, then addressed the chief judge. My lord, I remand Adrian Blackwood into the custody of this court to face charges of high treason, murder, conspiracy, and corruption of justice. Let him be tried by the same standards he denied to his victims. As the guards moved to formally arrest Adrian, he turned his fury on me. You, he snarled, struggling against his restraints. You planned this from the beginning. Everything you told me, every vision you claimed to have, it was all lies. Not lies, I said quietly. Truth. I did have visions, Adrian. I saw exactly how your tyranny would unfold. I saw the innocent people who would die because of your ambition. And I saw how justice would finally be served. Impossible, Adrian spat. You're just a naive girl who got lucky. I smiled sadly. I'm a woman who learned that sometimes the dead must return to ensure the living receive justice. As Adrian was led away in chains, still ranting about conspiracies and betrayal, I felt a profound sense of completion. The man who had destroyed my previous life was finally facing consequences for his crimes. The trials that followed were swift and thorough. With the evidence of Adrian's surveillance network exposed, dozens of other cases were reopened and re-examined. People who had been unjustly convicted were posthumously pardoned, their families compensated, and their names cleared. Sir Marcus Thorne was restored to his position and granted new lands in recognition of his service in exposing the conspiracy. Lady Catherine Westbrook was elevated to the position of Royal Advisor on Justice, tasked with reforming the kingdom's legal system to prevent future abuses. Captain Brightwater was promoted to Commander of the Royal Guard and given authority to investigate and eliminate any remaining elements of Adrian's spy network. Jonathan Gray was commended for his courage and integrity and given expanded authority to oversee all official records and ensure their authenticity. Adrian himself was convicted on all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment in the kingdom's most secure fortress. The king had commuted the death sentence, unable to bring himself to execute his own son, despite the magnitude of his crimes. As for me, I found myself in an unexpected position. The king offered me any reward I desired for my role in exposing the conspiracy. Lady Seraphina, he said during a private audience, your courage and wisdom have saved countless innocent lives. The kingdom owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. Your Majesty, I replied, I ask only for the chance to use my insights to serve the kingdom's true interests, perhaps as an advisor on matters of justice and investigation. The king smiled sadly. You have an unusual gift for seeing the truth behind carefully constructed lies. Yes, I believe such counsel would be invaluable. And so I became the royal advisor on truth and justice, using my knowledge of the future to prevent other conspiracies and protect innocent people from those who would abuse their power. It was a position that allowed me to ensure that the injustices I had witnessed in my previous life would never be repeated. 6 months later, I stood once again in the Rose Garden at Ashworth Manor, but this time as a woman of authority and influence, rather than a naive girl dreaming of romance. The white roses were in full bloom, their perfumes sweet in the spring air. Thomas approached with his usual gentle smile, but now there was respect mixed with affection in his eyes. My lady, the gardens are particularly beautiful this year. Indeed they are, Thomas, and they'll continue to flourish for many years to come. He nodded knowingly. Thanks to your vigilance in rooting out the weeds before they could take hold. As I walked through the gardens, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. Death had been a teacher I never would have chosen, but it had taught me lessons I never could have learned otherwise. I had learned that justice delayed is not justice denied, that truth has a power that can overcome even the most carefully constructed lies, and that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from avoiding betrayal, but from turning the betrayer's own weapons against them. The ruby brooch sat in a place of honor in my new office at the palace, not as jewelry, but as a reminder of how the tools of oppression could be transformed into instruments of justice. Adrian had given me the very device that would ultimately destroy him, never imagining that his victim might one day become his judge. I had achieved total victory. Adrian was imprisoned, stripped of power and influence, his conspiracy dismantled, and his victims vindicated. The kingdom was safer, more just, and more vigilant against the corruption of power. But perhaps the greatest victory was personal. I was no longer the frightened, naive girl who had been easily manipulated and destroyed. I was a woman who had stared death in the face and returned with the wisdom to protect others from the fate I had suffered. As the sun set over the gardens, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. In my previous life, Adrian had won through manipulation, fear, and the abuse of trust. This time, he had been defeated by truth, courage, and the patient application of justice. The dead had been avenged, the innocent had been protected, and the kingdom had learned that no one, regardless of their position or power, was above the law. I touched the white roses one final time, their petals soft beneath my fingers, and smiled. In my first life, these gardens had been burned after my execution, destroyed by those who believed I was a traitor. Now they bloomed more beautifully than ever, tended by hands that knew the truth. Justice, like the roses, could survive even the harshest winter if properly tended, and I would ensure that it continued to bloom for all the seasons to come. The story of my rebirth was complete, but the story of justice in the kingdom was just beginning. With the tools and knowledge I had gained through death and resurrection, I would build a future where no innocent would suffer as I had suffered, where truth would triumph over convenient lies, and where those who sought to abuse their power would find themselves facing the very justice they had tried to deny to others. I walked back toward the manor as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve the cause of justice. But tonight, I was content to savor the sweetness of victory and the peace that comes from seeing wrongs finally made right. Adrian had given me a bugged brooch, thinking to make me his unwitting spy. Instead, he had given me the key to his own destruction. And in the end, the very device he had created to monitor and control had become the instrument of his downfall and my triumph.